Hey everybody, this is Colin G. Murphy and welcome to show 60 of Colin Podcasting About Real Estate. Hope you guys are all doing great. Sorry it's been a while since I've last been in touch. There's various things happening with the business and with the move to Spain, but it's all good. Just hyper busy. Land business is really taking off. I've signed 3 deals in the last week, and I think 9 in the last 5 weeks. So it's really accelerating. I'm in the process of hiring a couple of people to help me out, and I'm kind of working on really drilling down on the systems and processes for scaling up that business in a big way in 2022. So I'm really enjoying it. Also busy on the renovation front. I've officially sold the first couple of houses that I bought after moving back to Spain from Tampa, Florida in July of this year. So it was great to have that feeling of having, bought a house that I've never seen, managed the renovation, listed it for sale, got it sold, made a profit, and moved on. So that's really encouraging, and delighted with that. And I've got a couple more in the pipeline that are just getting started in parallel with the land stuff. So yeah, I'm keeping busy. I'm enjoying it, and delighted to be doing all these things with real estate. It's given me a lot of freedom, really, to enjoy my life and spend time with my family. And the podcast is one of those things that I love doing. It doesn't obviously make me any money. I don't have any fancy sponsors on this show. It's not like Tim Ferriss where you have to listen to a podcast for 5 minutes before you get to the actual podcast. This is more or less straight to the point. And the guest today is a really good one. His name is Chris Larsen. We had a really good chat with Chris. He bought his first single family rental at the age of 21, and now he currently owns and manages 2,000 plus units in various multifamily syndications, mostly around the Atlanta, Georgia area. He's based in Asheville, North Carolina. He had a really fascinating journey, and I love the way that he didn't just go from 0 to 1,000 units in 5 years, the way some people actually have done. But he was very methodical. He's an engineering background. He worked a regular day job for 20 years. He's in his mid 40s now, but he's slowly built up his knowledge and real estate experience over many years. Putting his own money where his mouth is many times, slowly bringing on other kind of friends and other accredited investors along with him, and he's really accelerated a lot in the last 5 years. But there was a lot of hard work and toing and froing and buying and selling before that. So we talked about a bunch of stuff, how tragedy in college dramatically changed his focus, his early rental and stock market investments, the lessons he learned from a turbulent period at the end of the 90s through to 2008. So that encompassed the tech crash, 9/11, and the 2008 crash. So a lot of investors struggled during that period. His first syndication, his first 100 unit syndication, and what he bought afterwards, how he pivoted from kind of C class to A class just before COVID, his thoughts on how to prepare for the next downturn, and a lot more besides. So interesting guy, great conversationalist, a lot of wisdom accumulated in his kind of 20 plus year real estate career. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. I'll stop rambling on now. Let's just head on over and see what Chris has to say. Chris Larsen, welcome to the show. How are you doing, my friend?
Colin, I'm great. It's great to be here, and it's just so cool to be able to travel across the world via technology and have this conversation like we're sitting in the room face to face.
I know, I love it, and it would have been very difficult to do this 10 years ago. But I'm here in Madrid, Spain. You're in Asheville, North Carolina, and I'm really looking forward to digging into your journey.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
So tell us a bit about yourself, Chris. Where are you from? What do you do?
Yeah, so Colin, as you mentioned, we've been in Asheville, my wife and I, and now our 2 boys, 9 and 11. My wife and I moved here over 13 years ago. As we were talking before the show, I spent almost 2 decades in the pharma and medical device industry. I was in sales, so I was fortunate that I got to move around. Mm-hmm. And one of the companies I was with had an opening in Asheville. And I tell people, and some people don't believe this, but I'm an engineer. So I went to school to be an engineer. Okay. I love spreadsheets, and we're living in Northern Virginia, up in the DC area. And my wife and I, we said, hey, let's spend like 5 or 10 years here, establish our careers, enjoy the big city and everything that it has to offer while we're young, we have some money, don't have any kids. but we really yearned to get back to a better quality of life in the mountains. And I had this spreadsheet where I stacked ranked all these cities across the country, and Asheville was one of those cities. And I was having a conversation with a friend who was a manager with the company one day, and he invited me to move to Charlotte to work for him. And I said, I don't want to move from DC to Charlotte. I said, but Asheville's really interesting to us. And lo and behold, 9 months later, I was working for him in Asheville, North Carolina. So that's how we got to Asheville. But we're going to be talking about real estate today. And before I entered the medical device profession, I actually became a real estate investor, bought my first property at 21. And the reason I went to go work was because I needed to make some money to generate some capital to invest in these things that ultimately led to, the ability for us to have these passive streams of income after.
What led you to buy a property at 21? That's a pretty young age. Did you have kind of some family members or some friends that were a couple of steps ahead of you in the ladder, or where did that kind of initial passion come from?
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of pathway and story, Colin. And actually, this is part of the reason I wrote my book, which I'm happy to share with your audience here before the end of the show today. But I'm in college, and I mentioned I was going to school for engineering, but really what I was going to school for was to race my bike. All I wanted to do is become a professional cyclist, and that was my life. I'd ride, I'd go to class, I'd keep up with my grades enough. But in between my freshman and sophomore years, my best friend, my training partner, my college roommate, Chris, his name was also Chris, he passed away from a massive brain hemorrhage.
Oh, wow.
And I came back to school, and I was racing, and I was an all-American cyclist that year. I was top 5 in the country. I was winning a ton of races. But what I realized at the end of that following summer, after, kind of keeping my head down for a year, was that I just wasn't happy. And it was one of those moments where, if you're listening, excuse me, if you're listening, you may have experienced something like this, where you kind of like look up and think like, is this really what life's about? And it seems silly at that point in my life to be racing my bike when I just had this friend that passed away at the age of 18. He was a year younger than me. So I quit racing my bike, and I vowed to never let an opportunity pass me by, live every day to the fullest. And that might sound a little cliche, Colin, but in practice, what I knew was that you can't go and have all these experiences if you're struggling for money. And being a cyclist, I knew this, you're not going to make a lot of money. So I was always kind of entrepreneurial. So this is in the 90s. I had already started investing in the stock market, and I started day trading. So here I am day trading, and that was like, that filled this time that I used to spend on my bike, which was 15 to 25 hours a week. And I was making like $5,000-$6,000 a month day trading in college. So I'm day trading, but what happened was I'd be laying there in bed at like 2-3 a.m. in the morning, sometimes not sleeping, thinking about the next trade or doing research. And I thought, there's got to be a better way. Like, do I want to be doing this in another 20 years? And as I started to look at other options that were out there, I naturally looked at real estate as one of these options. My parents, to answer one of your questions, they had a few rental properties, but nothing big, just some single family rentals. Didn't really generate a ton of income at the time. Now it provides some comfortable income for my stepfather, who still owns them. But that's how I got led to real estate, and I ended up buying a property that we call it a house hack. It was a 3-bedroom townhouse, and I ended up moving into that and renting out the other 2 rooms, and that was my start into real estate.
That's awesome. That's a great way to do it. Yeah, 21-year-old house hacking. That's a well-worn path, and just getting the experience of buying a house, renting it out, self-managing, getting a loan. It's really valuable. So did you take a long break from investing after that and focus on your career, or were you always doing a little bit of real estate and a little bit of investing, outside of your 9 to 5? Yeah.
So what happened was I put a plan together. I'm a planner. I'm a planner. So I
I'm
always,
getting that
you
impression.
know, I do all this research and then I put a plan in place and then I do it. So I said, all right, let me buy enough properties so that after expenses, I can have $10,000 a month coming in. And now what I mean is after expenses, management fees, maintenance, all that, but before debt service. And my plan was simple, Colin. I thought, well, hey, now I just have to go make some money and pay these mortgages off. And $10,000 a month coming in my 30s, that's enough to be financially independent. So I had the properties all purchased, ready to go by the time I was 25, and I just started paying off those mortgages. So now I'm focused on my career. I get to about 30 years old. I'm finally making good money. I'm accredited. I got my head down. My wife and I have two boys, and another few years go by. My mother passes away. She had cancer. And this is another point in my life. I kind of stopped, looked in the mirror, and I said, what's going on? Like, is everything right? Do we have all the right things lined up? And the interesting thing is my wife goes back to work. She's an architect. She's gone to school for, 20 years to become an architect, nearly 20 years, when you add it all up. She goes back to work, Colin, and we pay taxes, we pay for daycare, and it cost us $11,000 that year for my wife to go back to work. Crazy. We didn't make any money. It cost us $11,000. So I'm sitting there talking to my wife, Jess, one day. I said, Jess, we got to figure out something. Do you want to stay home, with the boys? Because it doesn't make sense for you to work if if we're losing money. And she said, no, I don't want to watch the boys and stay home. And I admire that. I love that my wife likes to have a business and be productive. But I think it's unfortunate, I think it's unfortunate though, that, depending on what country you're in, where you are, what your financial situation is, it doesn't always make financial sense to have the other spouse go back to work. So we started looking at different options. We decided to start building spec homes, but I also looked at our real estate portfolios, kind of this comprehensive overview. And you know what I found? We were only making 7% return on our equity because our property values had grown, right?
Yep.
So, and then what I realized was we were paying tax. So I was making 4% return on my equity. And I thought, wow, here's a guy with an MBA in portfolio management. I am not doing a good job at managing our money. So as I started looking across the investment landscape, my wife started her own business. We started building spec homes and we started investing passively in multifamily investments.
What year was this when you started building spec homes?
That would have been about 2012. So I will tell you, my wife called 31 banks, and the 31st bank, the last one on the list, said, yeah, we'll lend you money to build a spec home. So we were finally coming out of the bottom of the recession. So it was a great time to start building. And that allowed us to really help create some capital to put into these passive investments.
So what did you do with the spec homes? Were they there to keep them, or were you building them and selling them to regular homeowners?
Yeah. So what we decided to do, Colin, was we took the money, the profit. So we kept our capital flowing. We always had a spec home that we were in process of building, but we only did one at a time to keep our risk low. Sure. And all the profits, what we did, I would sell a single family property that I had, one of my rentals, and then we would also take the money from the spec homes and we would pile that money into either one or two multifamily or apartment investments at the time.
Nice. That's smart. So you're selling off the rentals and using the profits from that and the profits from the spec home to pivot into a bigger, higher value asset.
Exactly. And as you mentioned earlier, I'm working 60, 80, sometimes 100 hours a week. I was on call for most of my career in the medical device industry. And I really didn't want to physically manage those properties. So it was a really nice fit for where we were in our life at the time.
So that's quite it's not unusual. Credited people in their 30s, they're generally working their tails off, working their butts off, like you said, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. When did you have some other pivot or some kind of moment where you thought, okay, I don't need to do this, I can just continue investing make another plan.
Yeah.
Keep earning money.
Yeah. So kind of the last, as we kind of entered the last phase of the journey, if you will, into full enlightenment with the real estate journey. It's interesting. You start off and look, if you're listening and you're on your journey and your goal is to develop those passive income streams to cover, your basic monthly expenses. It's an awesome goal. And we got to that point. We were 38 years old. We had enough coming in to have a comfortable lifestyle. And it was kind of like the dog that catches the car, right? It was like, now what? Like, what do I do?
Yeah.
When we're here. And what I realized was along the way, Colin, we'd have these conversations and people would say, well, Chris, what do you do with your money? Or, you talk about real estate and, well, why don't you invest in this? Why do you invest in that? And people started to say, well, hey, how can I also invest like you? How can I develop these passive income streams? So over the past 5 years, we started syndicating deals ourselves. My first partner and I started our partnership in 2015. So about 6 years ago, bought our first apartment building in 2016. And if you're not familiar with syndications, it's just bringing in investors alongside of us. We pooled our money. We bought a 100-unit property. That was our first property that we bought. Today we're up over 2,000 units. And as we got to the point where I didn't have to work anymore, what I found was I'd prefer not to spend time in such a stressful endeavor like with the med device industry. And I found my true calling, which is sharing my story, Colin, and helping others shortcut the path to financial independence. Because as I mentioned, we were 38, but if I knew what I knew today, I could have cut at least 5, maybe even 10 years off of my personal journey to financial independence.
That's quite that last phase is very impressive. So what kind, before you went into syndication and bought that first 100 units, what kind of stuff had you been transitioning into? Was it a bunch of quadplexes and triplexes? Did you have like a 15-unit apartment building? What kind of things did you have?
Yeah, so I like to take small steps. So we went from single family properties straight to 100 units.
Okay.
Yeah, so we do have a 7-unit property here in Asheville, North Carolina. We actually have a couple short-term rentals here as well. But now we went. What I found was, again, I'm a numbers guy. What I looked at was it's not that much more work to buy 100 units than it is to buy, say, 4 or 10 or 20 units, right? Obviously, the numbers are bigger. So you have that component, especially if you have a syndication that you're putting together and bringing in investors. You have that piece of the puzzle. But when it comes to the due diligence, I was working with one of my coaching clients last night. He's got a duplex that he has that he's working on putting under contract. And it's the same process. It's the same underwriting. It's the same due diligence. It's the same legal process that we're going through with him. And that's only 2 units. Now it's in San Francisco, so it costs about as much as a nice
30-unit in Asheville. Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, so we made kind of a big leap there initially. But let me point out, we didn't do that all by ourselves. We partnered with the group that we had been investing with. We used them as partners to make sure that, they helped us check the blind spots, walk us through the process, made some introductions. We used their legal team, things like that, again, to help shortcut that process. Yeah.
And was that just you and your wife, or did you also bring a couple of your friends and family along with that in that initial partnership?
Yeah, I want to say we had, not to go back and look, I want to say we had about 20 investors along the way with that. The total capital raise for that property was about $4.5 million. And my partner and his uncle brought about half of that. And then we were able to bring, there was a 1031 exchange that was part of that. And then we had other investors that we brought along, and most of those investors invested about $50,000, $100,000 to help round out that raise.
I think that was very smart what you did there. Your first foray into a large acquisition was to partner up with somebody more experienced than you, because it is, even though the due diligence might be similar, there's a lot of things that you can get caught out on buying a 100-unit compared to buying a triplex on a corner. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. You might have gotten away with it, but you might have lost your friends a lot of money. So I would have, you know, I applaud that decision. And once you kind of learned the ropes, and if you did one or maybe two of them, did you then just decide, okay, we're going to set up our own kind of section here, and we'll do these ourselves. We'll be the lead on it. We don't need the training wheels anymore.
Yeah, so we kind of left the door open to that. You know, the first project got, you know, we got into it. You know, it takes as if you're listening, and as you know, Colin, it takes a little while to get in there, kind of learn what you don't know, and go through that whole process. You know, it took us about 6 months to kind of figure everything out. We had that property rolling. It's been a fantastic investment here over the last 6 years. And the following year, we bought 2 more properties. And we set an initial goal to acquire $50 million in assets over a 3-year period. And we hit that. We actually hit that almost right on the nose with respect to the date and the timeline. So yeah, we set our target out, and, you know, kind of work through that process on a deal by deal basis. We ended up buying.
Well, how would you classify these? Are they like Class C properties, Class B, sub 200 units? What kind of properties are they?
Yeah. So when we started out, our investment thesis, if you will, was let's go buy value add properties in large growing cities. And the initial city we targeted was Atlanta, Georgia, which is about 4 or 5 hours away from my first partner and I. So it was easy to get to by a plane ride. We had some relationships already built down there. It had really good demographics when we started in there. And we were buying properties built in the late 70s into the 80s. So these would be what we would probably call C to B minus assets, fairly large value add projects. So we were looking for projects that we could inject $5,000 to $10,000 a door. And at that time, we were paying somewhere between $75,000 to $125,000 a unit for these properties. And they were anywhere north of 100 doors. So we were targeting really between 100 to 200 doors, somewhere between 10 to $15 million in asset value for those properties. And we bought them kind of in all across the greater Atlanta metro area. And again, these were what you would call workforce housing. You know, so just really solid properties that we can go in, inject some capital, improve the quality of the neighborhood, improve management, and raise rents, typically on average $100 to $200 a month over our 3 to 5 year time horizon. Now, over time, we've kind of moved away from that, I think, and I can kind of get into some of the reasons why we've done that. But that's how we started initially, and that was a terrific market segment.
And what was your plan to refinance those and buy out the other passive investors, or was it to just flip them and share the profits, like sell them after 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, so we had, you know, we've one of two. So we have properties that we have pulled capital out of and distributed that to investors. We've had one property that we've refinanced in those initial 5. We've had 2 properties that have gone full cycle out of those initial 5 properties. The returns have been great. Obviously, you know, if you go back, it's been a really nice period to be in that asset class. But we basically said, we'll either refinance or sell, just depending on what the market situation was. I think one of the important things is we had agency debt, Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac debt on all those properties, good, stable, long-term debt that allowed us to maintain our position in those properties for, you know, well within the hold period.
Okay. And it sounds like after a few years of buying the kind of 40-year-old C plus B minus properties, you transitioned. What did you transition into?
Yeah. So in 2019, and look, I like to study history. I like to I'm a data guy. I like to study cycles. If you're listening and you haven't read it, there's a terrific book, and it's sitting back here with the yellow jacket. It's called The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking. The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking. Okay. And it walks through the history of real estate in America. It's actually written by an Australian, Phil Anderson, but he studies history, he studies real estate history. And both of my parents were in the real estate. So my stepfather was a contractor. My mother ended up going and working for one of the construction companies my father worked for in the early 90s. And I'll never forget, they both lost their jobs during the savings and loan crisis.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Early 90s.
Yeah, early 90s. My mother went back to being a teacher, actually a teacher's assistant, which we can talk about how little teacher's assistants make in this country.
Sure.
And then also my father went back to swinging a hammer on his own. So he started his own business, did very well, my stepfather. And I got to work with him a lot, which taught me the value of not only manual labor, but also the value of not having to do manual labor, especially in the middle of July when I was shoveling shingles with him on a roof.
Yeah.
But so they both go back to work. I'll never forget, that period of time. And then I go to school, I'm in college. I end up finishing my engineering degree and I start to do an MBA. I sit down in class one day and I watch the second plane fly into the World Trade Center. And we all know, the economic slowdown that occurred after that. Mm-hmm. So I lost my internship that I had lined up. I watched the stock market, crash. And I thought, all right, this is interesting. I watched kind of what was happening in the real estate market during that period of time. And then 2007, 2008 comes and I watched the Great Recession unfold and I watched what happened to the value of my properties. So over a short period of time, I happened to, be a young teenager in college and then out having a portfolio. And I saw three of these downturns in the real estate cycle.
Very turbulent.
So as I start to, research history and I read through this book, I see, okay, real estate goes through cycles, and it typically, it's about an 18 to 19 year macro cycle with typically a slowdown in the middle. And these are economic cycles that go back, since the founding of this country. So, are they set in stone? No, but they're pretty consistent, pretty consistent. So in 2019, it looked like we were coming up to this mid-year cycle. And you can go back and listen to some of my interviews. They're on my website, back in late 2019. I said, hey, we need to be cognizant of 2020. I think that there's going to be some economic turbulence. I sold everything I had in the stock market at the end of 2019. I also, my partners and I started buying B+ and A quality assets because these assets would have a higher quality resident. What I mean is residents make more money, right? Well,
white collar jobs.
To be, exactly. So if you're making $80,000 to $100,000 on average, you're probably going to have a slightly different role and have some different stability and different credit than if you're making $40,000 to $60,000, right? Mm-hmm. So that thesis worked out very well last year. Our collections in those properties that we started to acquire, kind of a little bit higher up on the food chain. We had a 98% collection rate last year during COVID. 98%.
Very high. That's high anyway.
Yeah, we were very happy with that. So that's the reason why we started to kind of move into these higher quality properties. And the other reason, Colin, is that what we found is the cap rates, we're only looking at maybe a 50 basis point difference, like 0.5% difference between the cap rates that people were paying for these 70s and 80s built properties that we were paying for properties that are built in the last 10 years. So personally, I felt that the risk that was being taken in some of those properties, the reward didn't quite outweigh it. And again, it's nice. I'm fortunate that we have properties in our portfolio that span the early 70s all the way up to we're in the middle of acquiring a property that is being completed as I record this show here today with you. So it's nice to have kind of a blend of properties throughout the portfolio today.
All right. So speaking of cycles, then where do you think we are now? I mean, obviously COVID caught everyone by surprise, and a lot of people thought multifamily syndicators were going to be the kind of canaries in the coal mine, and then thankfully it didn't happen. But we've been on a bit of a boom since 2010, 2011. Where do you see this happening? Is it going to last another 5 years? I mean, will it come down eventually? What are you thinking?
Yeah, so let me shine my crystal ball here and peer into it and see what we see. So
first off, I don't.
So first off, and I said this at the end of 2019, almost 2 years ago now. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't predict the future. If you're listening to me, certainly, go do your own research. Make your own educated decisions. But again, what history tells us is typically, we're looking at, the end of this 18 to 19 year cycle, probably somewhere in the next few years. So what I personally am doing, and what I think is smart to do, whether you're in multifamily or whether you're in other areas, we have a housing shortage today. Okay. We have a housing shortage in America. That means we need more units of apartments. We need more units of housing. We need to build more. So the demographic trends, the millennials, the Gen Zs that are moving in, even the baby boomers that are renting, are supporting the housing market. Now, do I think there's going to be a slowdown, 3 years out? Yes. So what does that mean? I'm focused on quality assets that are cash flow positive, that have low leverage. So if you went back to 2007, 2008, 2009, you would have been way better off selling everything before the peak and buying. But if you're like me and all your assets were cash flow positive with low leverage, you could hold them and make money throughout that pullback. So, if you're buying today, I think you need to be conscious, make sure you have adequate reserves, you have adequate cash on hand. So not only can you withstand any pullback or downturn, but also you can take advantage of those downturns as well. And if you do choose to hold property or assets, I would be careful of focusing on speculative assets. I think the higher quality assets with cash flow, low leverage, low break-even occupancy in case there is a pullback is going to be beneficial. And I'll also say that we focus not only on multifamily, we've added mobile home parks, which perform very admirably during downturns to the portfolio, self-storage, which is slightly different. I mentioned very briefly earlier, we have some short-term rentals. So we love multifamily, we love income producing assets, but we also have some other different types.
Kind of covering your bases there. You're quite diverse. From mobile home is I mean, in one way it's, if you're at either end of the spectrum, I mean, there's always going to be people that will rent a mobile home. People on modest wages, people that used to be on middle class wages but fell on hard times, they might need to trade down to mobile homes. So there's always going to be kind of demand on those rungs of the ladder, all other things being equal, I guess.
Absolutely.
I'm not so sure if that applies to the A plus kind of multifamily. Sometimes I think they might be the first to suffer in a downturn because people might not want to pay for the fancy clubhouse and tennis courts and all the rest of it. They want to, trade down to something more modest.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, if you're, especially if you looked over the past few years, there was an oversupply in some of these luxury assets, in urban markets specifically. And what happened was that had some downward pressure on those rents. And if there's a pullback, if you lose your job, if you're paying $1,500 a month for a mortgage or for rent, would you rather pay $1,500 or move into something that's 10 years older where you can pay $1,300? You probably move across the street and pay $1,300. So those are certainly things that we need to be cognizant of.
No, and I love that you've got that diversity. That seems very smart that you've built it up and then you built outwards. So that's really good. I mean, so you got a lot of different investors participating with you. What kinds of people are they? What kinds of, do you need a lot of money to get involved in those kinds of deals you're doing? Can you give us a bit more insights?
Yeah. So excuse me 1 second, Colin. I'm a little over a week post-COVID here, so I still have a little bit of a scratch in my throat from time to time, but I was very fortunate. Little public health announcement. If you've never heard of it, I wear a thing called an Oura ring. It tracks my heart rate variability, and body temperature. And 48 hours before I had a symptom, it let me know that my body was under stress, and I was able to isolate and start some prophylactic treatment. It's OURA. Oura ring. It's super technology. So the crux of our business, Colin, is deal flow and capital. So if we don't have any deals, we can't share deals with investors. And if we don't have investors with capital, we can't buy high quality deals. So we're always looking for investors that are interested in investing alongside of us. And we're always looking for good deals. So most of our investors, they're professionals. I spent, as I mentioned, nearly 2 decades working with physicians. So we have a lot of doctors, a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners, and sales executives and other types of executives that work with us. Most of our investments are limited to accredited investors. So if you're not familiar with that term, an accredited investor in the United States, and I'll kind of paraphrase here. You can take a look at the SEC definition if you want. But if you make over $200,000 a year, or your net worth is $1 million, not including your primary residence, you're probably accredited. You have to have a bit of a track record and expectation going forward that you're going to continue those trends. But here's the thing. If you don't invest in real estate, and if you're listening to this show, you probably do, but if you've mainly invested in stocks, bonds, what is an amazing thing, and this is why in my book, I call multifamily the holy grail of real estate, the holy grail of investing, is because if you add this type of asset class to your portfolio, it increases your returns. And guess what? It decreases your risk. And Ray Dalio, one of the Bridgewater Capital, one of the most successful investors of all time, maybe even more successful than Warren Buffett, calls that the holy grail. If you can increase returns and decrease risk, that's just an amazing thing. So if you actively invest in real estate and you're interested in adding some more investments like this that you don't have to actually spend your own time doing, it's got wonderful tax benefits. Or if you've never invested in real estate and you want to invest along somebody that's been doing it and has a track record, you can check us out, nextlevelincome.com. We have an invest link where you can learn more. And you can also get a free copy of my book if you click on the book link. And if you're in the United States, I'll even send you a copy for free.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll get all that stuff on the show notes, mate. And so if somebody had like a accredited investor had $100,000 to invest, what kinds of return might they expect in today's market where the cap rates are not as high as they were, 5 years ago?
Yeah, so I'm always careful to throw out returns, Colin, because every deal's different. But we are typically looking for deals that are going to be cash flow from day one for our investors. So we want strong single-digit cash flow for our investors, and we typically are looking to be able to double investors' money over our hold period. So call it 5 years. So, and that's a blend between cash and appreciation. And we're buying properties that we have an operational pathway that we know we can increase revenue. So whether that's going in and actually injecting capital, even properties that are 5 years old, we may spend $5,000 to $10,000 to improve the quality of that asset. Or we may have some operational efficiencies that we know we can apply in certain markets that allow us to decrease expenses or tweak revenue and increase that revenue. So if you add the cash returns plus the appreciation, we try to double investors' capital over, say, a 5-year period.
Yeah, that's a good deal. That's a good IRR. So, it sounds like you've had a lot of success, a lot of hard-earned success in the last kind of 10, 15 years. I'm just wondering, what's your why? What continues to fuel you to work so hard getting these big projects across the line when you could probably realistically just work part-time and work on your golf handicap?
Yeah, and it certainly needs work. I haven't played much since I had kids, but I've been riding I get to ride my bike quite a bit here in the beautiful mountains in North Carolina. But yeah, so I hit this point, Colin, and it was actually depressing when I thought about leaving, my career of 18 years and the people that I spent so much time working with. And what I realized was I wanted to give back. I wanted to share the lessons that I taught. And that's one of the things I really loved in the medical device space. I got to train reps that were new. I got to hire and help develop that. And the reason I wrote my book, started the podcast, and we have the website, which you're not going to find a ton of investment information up there. You're going to find a ton of educational information up there that's free. And my personal why initially was to be able to spend the time with my children, with my boys that my father didn't have. My father died at 5. And what I found was, as I had conversations with people, what I now take for granted, what you take for granted, Colin, this knowledge, most, the average person doesn't know. And my why is to share this information with people, because I know that real estate and the passive income that's generated for our family has allowed me to live a better, more fulfilling life, more impactful life. And I want to help other people be able to do the same.
No, great answer. I love it. And I can certainly empathize with that. That's awesome. Sounds like you're helping a lot of people, and you're still not doing the 80-hour weeks. I'm sure you're doing far less, but you're earning great money, helping people along the way, building assets for you and your family's future. It's a good day's work right there. So yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation, Chris. I'd love to stay in touch with you. If people want to find out more about you and your company, is there a website or social media they should get in touch with you from?
Yeah, so we try to, and I've had to learn a lot about social media here, but we're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, we're even on Instagram now. And yesterday I was looking into TikTok. But like I said, you can get our free book. You can learn more at nextlevelincome.com. And if you want to get in touch with me directly, email me, chris@nextlevelincome.com. If there's something we've talked about today, Colin, please feel free to reach out. Like I said, I love to help people. If there's a resource you're looking for, if there's a connection that you need in the space, I am happy to help you out on your personal journey towards financial independence.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Chris. I'll get all that information up there. I've loved speaking with you, and appreciate your time, buddy.
Thank you, Colin. Thanks for everything you're doing for your audience.
There you have it, folks. That was show 60 with Chris Larsen on the Colin Podcasting About Real Estate show. I hope you enjoyed it. I thought that was a really interesting conversation. I know I've had various multifamily experts on the show. It's been a while since I've had one, and I really appreciated the slow, methodical way that Chris worked his way up to those 2,000 units. It didn't just happen when he decided to do it as a 25-year-old and just dived in head first. He was a lot slower and more methodical. He worked that 70, 80-hour a week job for 20 years while building real estate assets on the side and setting himself detailed goals that him and his wife aimed for. And once he achieved the goals, he carefully recalibrated and set new goals and just kept aiming higher and higher, but in a very kind of slow, methodical way, probably minimizing his risk and maximizing the kind of return on each stage of that real estate journey. So I really liked how he had that multi-phase journey, starting out as a 21-year-old with that house hack, building his first few rentals, trading up to multifamilies, getting to know how the lending works, going up into the higher end multifamily, learning about syndications with a JV partner, bringing other investors along, finding out how to get those big Fannie Freddie guaranteed loans for the 1 to 200 complexes, pivoting again from the C- class to the kind of B+, A- class, and diversifying into mobile homes and self-storage. I mean, there's a lot of thought that went into that. He wasn't an accident. It isn't random. He seems like a very methodical guy who's achieved his success through a lot of hard work and grit and thought, and just setting aside that time to use your brain and learn from your own efforts and learn from other people's mistakes and learn from working with teams and getting those partners. There's a lot in there that I might not have said out loud, but there's a lot to learn from how he went about that real estate journey that I quite admired, and I'm grateful that he was on the show, and I'll look forward to staying in touch with him. We had a good chat afterwards, as I usually try to do. So yeah, I'll see you again soon for show 61. Thanks again for tuning in. Please do remember to give the show a like or a rating and wherever you listen to it. And if you can share this with some of your friends and family on social media, if you see it, if you think this content is useful to them, I'll be super grateful for that. It does get the word out quite efficiently by doing it through social media. So appreciate any links that way. But this is it for me for now. Feel free to reach out to me if you want to have a chat about anything. Just go to colinvestments.com. You can schedule a call with me to discuss where you're at in your real estate journey. If I can help during a quick 20-minute conversation, I'm happy to do so. And yeah, thanks again, guys. I will see you again in a couple of weeks, but it's a sunny Friday afternoon, and I'm out of here. And thanks again for tuning in. This is Colin G. Murphy signing out. Bye-bye.